Okay,
Great.
David, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thanks. Sorry for the video, guys. I'm in my car just waiting to go into a deposition in a little bit. So I can't change my my name just because I don't see three dots from my phone. But anyway, welcome everyone. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. We were thinking about topics for today, and you know, there are a lot of things going on, a lot of things COVID related, a lot of things lockdown related, a lot of things return to work related. And one thing we were thinking about that maybe is a little bit different, but still a hot topic, at least in the United States, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're really interested in everything you guys are seeing in your home country. A couple things that I was thinking about is to what extent diversity is required. And for example, in the United States, as I think a lot of people know, we have a lot of different regulations state by state as opposed to a national regulation. And so in California, for example, there was a law requiring that every board of directors have a woman on it, which was considered very novel. But a court recently struck that down. But that's an example of legislation mandating diversity, if you will. The other thing we see is legislation or legal action in the United States that actually in some ways inhibits or prevents diversity. And an example would be that in the United States, we have people suing the other way, which is that their complaint is that they've been the victim of what we call reverse discrimination, and essentially diversity efforts have taken jobs away from white males largely, and that they find that that's unfair because on some level, diversity is, you know, if pushed too far, the claim is that it ends up being discriminatory against the majority group. And so really interesting. And then there's a whole bunch of area in the middle in the United States, which is perfectly fine. Things like growing the applicant pool to make sure that you have a diverse applicant pool. That's a very, very popular, very popular way to increase diversity in the workplace. Doing training to ensure that people aren't biased in ways that maybe they don't understand. That's another way to try to help with diversity. And so was really interested in hearing from folks about what, I guess first, how important is diversity in your country? Is it a topic that people are talking about, or is it just not something that's really important? And then second, to the extent it is important and it is being talked about, what are things that are being done in your country to promote diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace? So I can't see anyone in terms of if they're raising their hand through the little you know, that little symbol you can put up. So I don't know if you want to call on people, or if folks just want to jump in.
Yeah, I think we have a small enough group today where folks can go ahead and jump in. I don't see anybody with their hand raised, but you are welcome to go ahead and jump in, or if you'd like to raise your hand, you can do so as well. Or we could just go around the horn if we want to. We could start in order that I see you on my screen, if we wanted to start with Louisa in Luxembourg.
Yeah, hi all. No, Luxembourg, it's a bit of a hot topic. It has been for a wee while, but to be very honest, there is not a massive amount of legislation to not say zero at the moment, obviously apart from very specific areas. There's a push towards what, in inverted commas, positive discrimination, but which is backfired so far. So for the moment, yes, it's very much a case of, if we do aim to have a certain number of, for example, women in management positions or on board members, it's something that's sort of advertised and sort of quite loudly and quite broadly by the company to sort of, you know, more on a sort of ESG scale, rather than something being legally required in general, as I say, apart from in specific areas. So yeah, to be continued.
Sorry, you used the term positive discrimination. What does that mean? In what context is that? I mean, that's the first time I've heard that phrase being coined in that manner. Positive discrimination. They seem to be at two opposite ends.
The idea was basically to say, you know, a little bit like what David was saying earlier. So, you know, we want to have X number, for example, X number of women on in each I don't know, board of directors, for example. And then, so this, it was sort of coined to be able to push this. So, i.e., yeah, we need, you know, we've got this, our company needs to have at least one woman on the board, i.e., it's discriminatory in the sense that we're choosing someone solely based in this, you know, on their gender, for example. But this is positive because we're doing this for a positive reason, and that backfired somewhat. That was sort of just before COVID, but there was a real push to try and do that. And so this notion then, again, a little bit, you know, what like David said earlier, that sort of then said, well, look, why is this person being put here? Is she really up to task, etc.? And so it's sort of come full circle a little bit now, which is now, it's sort of gone back a little bit more to grassroots, which is, look at us, we're doing really well, we stand out from the rest of the sort of competing companies because we have X number of nationalities, we have X number, for example, of women who are in high positions, etc.
Thank you.
Thanks, Louisa. How about our friends from Gianni? I see we've got Chiara and a colleague as well in Italy.
Hi, hello everyone. Nice to meet you again. Well, let's say that D&I in Italy, it's not yet so an hot topic, at least under a law point of view. I mean, companies are becoming more often, are taking care more often of this topic, maybe implementing some policies that guarantee diversity and inclusion of women and any kind of races, but from a legislative point of view, it's not maybe like in the USA, where I've heard from David that there is more also attention to this topic from the government and legislative body. For example, in Italian companies, I have noticed doing some researches that there is no still, for example, a D&I department. Instead, I'm curious to know if also in other countries, companies are implementing a specific department, because from our research that I have done, it results that only 2 Italian companies have a specific figure, which is called Chief Diversity Officers, and are, if you are interested in Barilla and Gucci, but they are like a unique example of companies that have this kind of figure. And I don't know if in other countries instead companies are implementing this kind of department, which can be useful at company level. The only example of legislative action that has been taken that I have heard about, it's in the banking sector, where in effect the government had decided to implement some rules about the number of women that should be in the board of banks, but this is the only sector. So yeah, this is more or less what happens in Italy.
Maybe I can add, yes, just to like in Luxembourg, here in Italy, with regard to a specific piece of legislation, really in the last years, the actions have been taken by legislators by providing only disclosure information about the number of women and men employed in the companies. In each companies, employers have this kind of a disclosure obligation, but they don't have the obligation to hire a certain percentage of men and women, as opposed to the case of listed companies, the board, directors in listed company, where we have a quota reserved to women, as in Luxembourg, of course. But and this is the peculiarity is that it's left to the company to implement the policies, as Chiara said, in order really to improve the presence of women in the workplace. And indeed, there are companies and good companies like Gucci is absolutely very, very sensitive to this issue. And we know that these kind of, companies are sensitive, but on the average is not really as, they're not so sensitive as maybe in the US, for example. And then the inclusion of disability workers have been always taken into account in Italy, because we have always had the legislation requiring the hiring of a certain percentage of disabled people. So that's how we face the inclusion vis-a-vis disabled people.
All right, thank you. How about Fabian in France?
Sorry. Hi, everyone. As regards France, the equal treatment or prohibition from discrimination at large has been a hot topic for several years now. Last act that was passed was no later than December 2021, where there is a formal requirement, which is the second one actually, requiring that management positions are filled by 40% of women at minimum, and this is the target that the government has set for 2030. But the funny thing is that a previous act dated 2011 already had been passed, requiring the same target. And when we look at the surveys in companies in France, which for the most recent ones date back to 2020, we see that only 1/4 of the French companies have amongst their 10 top positions an equality in between men and women at these positions. So there is a lot to do to reach the 40% target, which has been postponed to 2030. We see a lot of articles in the French press on this topic, but legally speaking, we see that there is a difficulty to reach the targets that have been set by the French government. This is only related to equality, gender equality on boards or top management positions, but there is also quite a huge amount of legislation regarding to diversity at large, relating to handicap, to ethnical origins. And there are the main thing is that the government has led to the social partners the role to negotiate in the branches and in the business sectors and in companies how to proceed to reach the non-discrimination principle. And we see that in every companies of 50 employees and more, there is an obligation to negotiate and to display some data to the Works Council, to the staff reps every year on what is the situation for the non-discrimination targets between men and women, with handicapped people versus non-handicapped people, and there is an obligation to negotiate with the Works Council every year on how to proceed to ensure that the company is compliant with his obligations towards equality between employees. So there are many texts which are passed every 2 or 4 years, depending on which government is running France, and the topic is always the same, but the method and the tools to achieve the goal are more and more constraintful for the employers, with an obligation to talk every year of this topic and to ensure that the company has the proper tools to achieve the goal that the government has set. So that's for France.
Fabian,
Great,
thanks.
thanks, Fabian. And
I was
go ahead,
just going
David.
to ask if you don't mind, is that controversial at all? I mean, is there any backlash in France, you know, among people who said, hey, we shouldn't be actively promoting women, it should be more organic or natural, that we shouldn't be legislating percentages in the workplace?
Yes, actually, there is quite a debate around these questions, but what we see is that people who say that we should let the natural things come along are identified as boomers, you know, and so most of people say if we let nature and natural things come along, we won't manage to have this equality. So we have to impulse something, and once we have impulsed this, maybe the nature will follow. You know, this is the psychological state of mind in France now, saying if we let people choose and if we let things go naturally speaking, we won't manage to do that. Hence the act that was passed 10 years ago, and which came with no satisfying results actually in terms of gender equality in top positions.
Great, thanks, Fabian. And if you do have a question for someone, please feel free to raise your hand or jump in. We definitely want to keep this as a discussion, so we welcome questions to your colleagues. How about you, Suganti, in Malaysia?
Unfortunately, we've been having a lot of calls in terms of the government making calls out to private companies to encourage participation of women on their boards, but nothing legislated yet to date. So it's, I think, pretty much the same around the world as what our friends have already shared with. The encouragement is there, but it's also an instance where as long as you don't have it legislated, then yes, it's there, but we'll try, but there's nothing to really push you for that. And I think in terms of generally for most companies, predominantly the senior management or board of directors, that's made up generally of males. Women, you would have maybe one or two, but it is changing, but I think it'll be a long way more to go before we reach that equality. But what I have seen surprisingly is not so much from the government, but clients, international clients are actually reaching out with their policy statements, which actually speak about the need to have diversity, looking at ethnicity, you know, those issues. So that I found surprising, because like in Malaysia, you don't really have laws pertaining to discrimination and so forth. You have one article, two articles, but that's it. Not much focus as such in there. But clients are actually having that as part of their policy statements. And, you know, if you want us to come on board, then you've got to show us that you've got this. So within the firm itself, it's excellent, because I think in Shern, predominantly it's women in the partnership, so that we're quite proud of. But that's a change I've seen taking place over the last couple of years, that need for diversity and inclusiveness. Veena,
Thanks,
you've got your
Suganti.
hand
And I
up.
see Veena. Yeah.
I just wanted to, before I get like my turn to speak about India, I just wanted to add to what you said in terms of clients speaking about diversity. We've in fact have had mandates where clients have asked us to ensure staffing of teams on their mandates, ensure that there are at least 50% women lawyers at every state. So 50% associates are women, half the number of senior associates are women, and the best deal would be if the partner leading the matter is a woman partner as well, which I thought was extremely interesting. And if we had to like deviate, they would want us to explain why, and we'd have to like tell them that the a person who has the expertise on a particular matter is of a different gender, and that's when they would go ahead, and which I thought was really interesting in terms of paving change.
And is that for international companies or homegrown?
Yes,
companies?
multinational
Right.
companies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
multinational companies, and they have these standard form instruction on how to bill, how to staff, all of those, right? The client instruction docket, and that very clearly it has now have instructions on the requirement to have strong anti-discrimination policies. They ask us about the maternity benefit that we give our lawyers. They ask us about the policy on workplace sexual harassment that we have in place, which is that supply chain accountability is, I think, going beyond manufacturing and transcending to law firms as well. So I was very impressed to see even questions being asked in this space.
Great, Veena. And if you want to, go ahead and keep chatting about India. And also we do have Tushar from our other firm in India, Vaish. So I will let you guys talk about India.
Sure, I'll start and maybe and then I'll hand over to Tushar. So again, this is a subject that I'm very passionate about, if I may say so myself. And in India, the representation of women in the workforce is really low. It's less than 20% as we see today, and it's fallen post-pandemic. So the representation is really, really low. And we do have a legislation that requires certain categories of companies to have a woman director on the board. That's, as on date, not good enough. We have a fairly old legislation going back to the 1970s, which requires that that there be no discrimination based on gender. And it's on equal remuneration legislation. Unfortunately, it's not something that's very enforced, and the pay parity discussion continues, the disparity continues. We also have legislations in terms of anti-discrimination of persons with disability, discrimination of persons belonging to the transgender group. So that's also something that's just fairly recent. But what I did think is interesting is now in the employment space, we are having regulations that require employers who employ women, say beyond a particular time, say post 6 p.m. or post 7 p.m., they're obligated with the responsibility of ensuring safety and security of the women. So they have to provide cabs to drop them back.
I think we may have, he's frozen. So Tushar, if you want to jump in.
Yes. Thank you, Hannah. Basically, Veena did cover
every hire.
We lost you, Veena. You froze.
Oops.
Go ahead, Tushar. I'll send her a note.
Yeah. Basically, what Veena just covered, I am
I think
covering up.
Go ahead, Tushar. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, of course, India has several legislations that try and encourage women employees to be employed within an organization. These legislations are endeavoring to empower women employees. To a certain extent, these legislations have done a good job. They have provided good footing for the women employees, and therefore we now see a diverse workforce coming in. We also noticed that earlier the Maternity Benefit Act, as Veena mentioned, was only for 12 weeks. Now India has increased it to 26 weeks for at least initial 2 children. We have a maternity benefit holiday for 26 weeks, which is in itself really creditable. The many state governments are now adopting a very proactive approach, and they are even open to women employees working in the night shift, even on the factory floor, which was earlier not allowed. We now have a high court judgment which now says that it will be discriminatory if you do not permit a woman employee to work on a factory work floor in the night shift. So to that extent, many state governments have now taken a very proactive approach. Of course, the state governments are little anxious with regards to harassment of women at workplace, and therefore they are requiring the employer to provide adequate safeguards and measures to be deployed in factory work floor or in establishment, so that the women employees can work without any stress, and they give their best output. So to that extent, India is now a progressive country, and the legislations are also being implemented, which earlier was not to be seen. Now we see that the government does ask question. The government has, come up with innovative ideas where women employees can put up their complaints. Like the central government has a she box where a woman employee can put up her complaint against the employer, and may the employer may be taken for a task. So these are some of the measures that Indian government has taken. And I do agree with Veena when she says that we have you know gender equality, and even transgenders of late now have their rights in India. We have Supreme Court, the apex court in India, which has clearly stated that cross gender marriages are permitted. So taking cue from that, many employers, as a progressive measure, have now even gender friendly policies are coming out. We have seen that at least few of our clients are coming up with policies where they are not only considering male, female, but even a third gender, and they are sensitizing their employees to a certain extent, wherein they want a transgender person to be part of the team. And employees now even respect such people as part of the team. Yes, we are progressing, but the progress is little less here. But slowly and gradually, India is opening up to such ideas. So that is really, according to me, it's really something happening space, and where the government and the employers together will be achieving a good benefit for the entire society here. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks Tushar, thanks Veena. How about Gabriela in Brazil?
Hi everyone. So here in Brazil, it's kind of similar to what Suganti said. A little bit what Tushar said is that we do in Brazil have some general anti-discrimination laws in our constitution. It is related to gender and race and age and LGBT communities, but we don't have a law enforcing, like we do have to have a quota for women in our boards or in senior positions. Although we don't have that, companies are trying to do that. We still have a long way of doing that. Public companies are getting women in their boards. We are very proud that in our law firm, we are doing a very good job on that, but the companies are still not. There is still a very gap to be fulfilled. The only law we have is related to people with disabilities. So we do have a quota that companies have to comply with people with disabilities. But what I also think is interesting, that what Suganti said, is that we have been receiving, in order to participate in our bid, you have to show that you have, then going to what Tushar said, not only women, but you have to have people of color, you have to have transgender. And sometimes it's hard because you cannot ask people like, are you a transgender? Like, do you, like, what is, but we do have some people that go and tell us, yes, I am. So, but that is kind of hard, but yes, that is, I think it's very good that we are having that, and companies are paying that attention, even in meetings. It's very bad to go to a meeting now only with a team of men. If you're doing a panel, has to have women. If you're doing a book, you have to invite women to be an author too. So it is increasing. We still have a long way to go.
It's interesting you say that, because in this day and age, I think as recently as last year, we had a client, I was on board, and all of them were males. Next thing you know, they politely conveyed the message, could we have a male partner on this? And I just thought, good God, in this day and age, this is still happening. So I'm not surprised. They didn't tell it to me on my face, but they tactfully conveyed it to one of my male partners. And they then called me, really sorry, but this is what the client has asked.
That is really crazy. I was doing a work last week and involved to terminate a president of a company. And he was older than me, but that's okay. I do that every day, every time. And I just asked the client, like, do you want somebody else? And the client, no, we want you. Like, we trust you, has to be you. That's no problem. Go with you. But when I was doing the termination, the president looked at me and said, who are you? How old are you? You cannot do determination with me. Like, I am 59 years old. It was, okay, congratulations. So we see that every day, like, even though we talk about that all the time, that if you are not old enough, if you're not a male, like, we still feel the discrimination several times in our day.
Some things regrettably have yet to change.
Thanks, Gabriela. How about Lara in Spain?
Hello, everyone. So I joined a little bit late, so I'm hoping I'm not going to repeat myself. We have seen quite a lot of legislation going on with anti-discrimination. And what we see in Spain is a clearer tendency to ask for damages in any claim that relates to discrimination, which I fully understand in the US and the UK, this was already a case, and maybe in other jurisdictions. In Spain, it was not always a case. And now we're finding case law setting the rules to determine these damages. So it's also becoming a more, economic contingency and only a compliance issue or just a soft law thing. We have more hard law and we find more damages on this point. So that has to do with equity as per ESG. And I don't know if someone else from the EU has already intervened here, but we do have this new proposal of directive on due diligence and supply chain. Did you already mention this before? No? Okay. So there is a new directive approved, a proposal of directive approved in end of February or just beginning of March. That has to do precisely with the requirements for all companies operating in Europe and their supply chain in terms of human rights and business. So this is going to be a really big change. It involves employment, but involves anything relating to ESG, including environmental, governance, social, everything there. And at the same time, most of the countries in Europe, Germany and France already have regulations in force on due diligence, and I'm sure my colleagues can comment on that, but they've had them for a while, or they have been approved beginning of this year on supply chain and due diligence. And there's a number of other countries, including Spain, that is working on their own regulations. So I guess that would be the pretty short update on the two topics. Happy to go any deeper if you want.
Thanks, Lara. Malik in Turkey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melike from Turkey. So actually in Turkey, the situation is also quite much similar with the other jurisdictions who share their valued opinions so far. So unfortunately, even though it's a very important topic, we do not have specific legislation requiring any actions for diversity, save for the certain requirements for people with physical disabilities. So we do not have any specific thing for the woman or any other sexual orientation people or other types of discrimination things. But on the opposite, you have the one legislation which is actually punishing the employers for making any discrimination against any people, but it can be due to any reason, like due to a maternity, or it can be due to gender or sexual orientation, or religious and religious beliefs, or sex, or philosophical opinions are also very discussed and sensitive topics in Turkey. So there can be also discriminations against those subjects in Turkey. So they're also protected under the law. But we have it only very recently, since 2016, I believe. So it's not a very old law neither. With respect to the people with employees with physical disabilities, we have this certain rule that if an employer is employing 50 or more employees in the workplace, then they should be employing the people with physical disabilities in the amount 3% of the total number of employees working in that workplace. And that rule is very strictly monitored, because once you are employing a person with physical disabilities, you have to notify this and register this with the governmental authorities. So I can fairly say that, at least from that point of view, we're protecting the people with physical disabilities very strictly. And if the government finds out that they are not, this requirement is not fulfilled, they are just issuing a fine against the company immediately. So this is the good part. But apart from the people with physical disabilities, unfortunately, we not have much legislation going on in Turkey to protect the other sensitive groups, let's say. Actually, we also have been receiving too many questions from the multinational clients, specifically due to the requirements of the UK law, as well as the new directive that's coming, which Ara just mentioned. But we are also having some difficulties to help our clients to fulfill these requirements as well, because our data protection law is quite much a little more conservative approach relating to the sensitive data. So when in one hand you are trying to ensure that there's diversity in the company, but whereas in order to do that you have to collect certain personal data and sensitive personal data, since the employers cannot benefit from the exemptions of processing sensitive data, we have been facing some problem to help our clients to guide on how they can fulfill their obligations in the EU, unfortunately.
Thanks, Marika. And I think Leo in Uruguay.
Hi, everybody. Well, regarding discrimination, we have a regulation in our country. We have a general law that establishes that any kind of discrimination due to gender, age, or any other reason is prohibited, including disabilities. And companies must have protocols, internal protocols regarding how to rule discrimination. No companies can do it by themselves, or they can do it in a collective agreement. And in collective agreements entered with the unions, it's quite often that you have clauses establishing that no, it cannot be any kind of discrimination in salaries regarding gender. Normally, it's more for gender than for age, but it's all, sometimes they also include that you cannot discriminate on salary, attending age of the employee. And recently, a court decision established that a dismissal of an employee of 55 years was a discrimination dismissal, because due to the consequence that dismissal will cause on employees' retirement benefits. Because in Uruguay, you are entitled to retirement benefits as from 60 years. And the Supreme Court understood that dismissing the employee at 55 was something like, it was the same that say that person will never be entitled to receive retirement benefit, because it should be very difficult for him to obtain a new employment at that age. So it's more, and it always is in the Council of Wages that are councils that in the Ministry of Labor that are integrated by the executive power, the unions and the employers, the Chamber of Employers. Discrimination is one of the topics that are decided and discussed, and you will find regulation establishing all these kind of provisions. And in case, for example, in disabilities, the dismissal of a person with disabilities is considered also a discrimination dismissal. An employee will be entitled to receive a double severance compensation. The dismissal will be valid. The employee won't be entitled to claim reinstatement, but he will receive a double severance compensation. That's more or less our current regulation.
Thanks, Leo. And I think last, Gael, do you have anything else to add from the EU or specifically Belgium?
Not really, just one specificity regarding our firm, because of course we have to comply with the law too. And very often our clients are requesting to provide them with numbers regarding diversity for men, women, LGBT, and other aspects. So for men and women, that's quite easy to provide. But for the other aspect, we are not able to request our staff because it's a confidential information, even if we have some, let's say, margin or flexibility in Belgium, because all the lawyers that are working with us are self-employed, which means that they are out of the scope of the regulation regarding discrimination for the employees. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility, but at the end, yes, for us, the most demanding person is not the regulation, but it's our client, and especially our clients from the US. For them, we have to provide with statements, numbers, and action showing that in fact we are acting actively against discrimination and that we're taking active measure for inclusion and diversity.
Great, thanks, Kyle. David, I'll go ahead and hand it back to you to wrap up the DE&I discussion.
Thanks, everyone. It's a really interesting topic, especially when it starts to get out to law firms and staffing and things like that, because in the U.S. and probably other places too, it results in a situation where you're actually, and someone mentioned this, you're actually picking people in part, or at least considering their gender, their race, other protected characteristics, which then creates this issue that they were talking about with positive discrimination. And so, and it sounds like it's getting more and more important, but maybe in ways that haven't been fully fleshed out yet. So thanks, everyone. Is really, really appreciate the discussion.
Great, thanks, everyone. So the other items we had on the agenda, we're talking about sort of an ongoing project we have. In our last email, Alyssa sent out a notice about the COVID vaccine policies for employers and employees. If you do have updates to those, feel free to send those to Alyssa. We update that on a rolling basis. The other thing that we discussed in our last meeting, which I think was in February or March, was a podcast on remote work in a borderless world. And I had sent out an email to those folks who attended that meeting to get some questions. I dropped the questions that we currently have into the chat. If you have any that you'd like to add to that or that you think are important for us to discuss, if you could either drop those in the chat or you can separately send me an email, and then I'd like to circulate a list of these questions next week. My question would be to you, and Suganti, you can weigh in on this. With this podcast, our intention, I think, would be to have these very short, maybe 20-minute recordings, right? Are we thinking that we would want to go on a country-by-country basis or a regional basis? Because these countries, excuse me, the questions are specific to jurisdictions, and sort of how that might play out in the series if we did it, where we would have 2 or 3 countries on each call. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if it is done on a regional basis, that may be easier to manage because So there'll be some common ground, maybe in terms of the tax and corporate implications, there might be differences, but I do recall on that last call we had, amongst all those that attended, there was only one country that had a specific visa to cater for that digital nomad situation. But generally, I think by and large, we would be on common ground. So maybe we could do it by region, and that would be easier as well to manage, I think.
Does anybody else have any other thoughts on that? And like I said, I did drop the questions that we currently have into the chat. If you want to add to that, you can send me an email directly, or as always, if you have ideas for other discussion, podcasts, etc., we welcome those as well. I know David had to drop off. I think he had to go to a deposition. Gael and Suganti, anything else from your end?
Not really.
Nothing else. Just that if anyone else, I think, has any ideas on a different topic for a podcast, then feel free to reach out as well.
Absolutely.
Hi. Just want to maybe take this opportunity to know if anyone of here the present or their colleagues are going to participate to the ELA conference in Athens. Maybe take opportunity, or next conference IBA in Madrid. I would like to take opportunity to see if we can then have the chance to meet an occasion of this conference. Any of you guys or any of the colleagues of your firms participating to this conference. And there is this upcoming conference in Athens at the end of June. So I would like to know if maybe Hannah can help circulate an email, just collect names of those who will actually participate to this conference.
Good idea. Myself, I will attend to the ELA in Athens, so I will be there. But it might be good to know if other person from the group will attend to the conferences, and if we can, let's say, schedule a short coffee or a drink outside the official program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I will participate then.
Yeah, what we can do, we've been talking about this internally. So we had launched, well, we have not launched them. We've added a feature on our website called discussion boards, which we're still having some technical issues with. So what I will do, I think we will set up an event on the website for these industry conferences so that people can just click an RSVP that they're attending. And then what we can do is circulate a list to everybody who is attending. You know, if it's something where we have 50 people who are attending, we may want to work with the local firm to host a breakfast or cocktails or something. But otherwise, we would circulate, and then you guys can organize coffee or a meetup on your own. So we will do that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you.
I was gonna say that Madrid is around the corner as well, so I will be there for the IBA, and I will ask if there's something official we can do as a firm also somehow to gather together in Madrid. So maybe we can talk about this later on because it's in September. But yeah, that definitely will gather a few of us as well.
Great. And of course, if there are any other ones that you guys are attending, just send me a note and we'll add that to our list of industry events that we should reach out to folks for. Okay, as always, everyone, thank you for joining us today, and we will be in touch about those events, the podcast, and probably our next meeting will be in the fall.